Certain polls have shown that roughly 10% of the American population self-identifies as libertarian. When asked more specific questions, such as if one is fiscally conservative and socially liberal, that number has reached as high as 40%. The main problem is that most Americans don't know what libertarianism is, or they identify the label as just another word for conservative and dismiss the ideology. Just like every other ideology, libertarianism has many different strains and there's no one-size-fits-all philosophy. The same goes for any label. President Obama is certainly a different kind of liberal, as Congressman Dennis Kucinich or Ralph Nader, and Governor Mitt Romney is certainly a different kind of conservative, as Congressman Ron Paul. Here, I will explain what I believe are the 6 major kinds of libertarianism and how we can unite them. First, the most well-known style of libertarianism today is defined by the Tea Party movement. Many Tea Partiers are conservatives and some are libertarians, but all seem to follow in the footsteps of former Republicans. Tea Party-style libertarianism was popularized by Glenn Beck and Michelle Bachmann, who sometimes call themselves libertarian, but tend to give libertarians a bad name because of how unpopular they are with liberal audiences. Before the Tea Party movement, this style of libertarianism really started with radio talk show host Neil Bortz. It came about when conservatives became disgusted with Bush-era domestic policy and was highly critical of the growth of government under Republicans. Many gave up the Republican moniker in hopes of joining a political movement that hasn't been completely tainted. However, they still generally favor military occupations and war and seem to be less critical of privacy rights. You will hear them defend the Patriot Act, Guantanamo Bay, enhanced interrogation, and other non-libertarian legislation. And they also tend to have a sense of national greatness. However, while they are the farthest from pure libertarianism, many people in the Tea Party movement read libertarian economists like Hayek and Mises. So there is a lot of hope that over time many of these people can be converted over from their conservative leanings. The paleo-conservatives are lesser known than the Tea Party style, and many actually attend Tea Party events, but despite the conservative name, they are much more libertarian than their Tea Party counterparts. Paleo-conservatives are actually descended of traditional conservatism espoused by former Senators Robert Taft and Barry Goldwater. Today's most reputable paleos are Joe Scarborough and Pat Buchanan, and the magazine The American Conservative. Like Tea Partiers, they are generally pro-life and favor strong borders, which puts them at odds with pure libertarians. However, unlike Tea Partiers, paleos tend to take a federalist position on controversial social issues and prefer to have the states decide. In addition, they also tend to be highly critical of the American empire and favor a more non-interventionist foreign policy. This form of conservatism has almost completely dissipated under the Bush years, but appears to be making a comeback with the rise of Ron Paul. Once again, many in the Tea Party are slowly moving towards the paleo position, but is still a minority in the conservative movement. The libertarian is a term that was recently used to describe the fusion of liberals and libertarians in fighting against bad Bush-era policies. In truth, most libertarians wouldn't consider themselves libertarians at all, but their version of liberalism is much different than what is espoused by the Democratic establishment. While economically these liberals will not reconcile with libertarians, there are many issues that we come to agreement with, and when alliances are formed, sometimes people cross over. The first major example would be Mario Savio, who is known for his great speeches in the 60s. Today's champions include Ralph Nader, Naomi Wolf, and Glenn Greenwald. While these liberals believe in government and taxes, they do not favor debt and believe in spending within the means of government income. Like other libertarians, they are highly critical of the Federal Reserve and strong advocates of privacy rights, non-intervention, and having the government stay out of the lives of personal habits. Cosmotarians are libertarians who try to appeal more to those on the left than those on the right by having a major balance of fiscal conservatism and social liberalism. The Koch brothers are the main funders of this style of libertarianism, but it is best espoused by Reason, the Cato Institute, John Stossel, and politicians like Governor Gary Johnson. They hold many views that combine paleo-conservatives and libertarians, as they favor reducing the size of all governments, want to protect economic and personal liberty, and favor a non-interventionist foreign policy. The catch is that they try to whitewash their views to make it seem less extreme to appeal to a larger audience, thus compromising some principles because they don't want to sound like radicals. Many pure libertarians find cosmotarians as sellouts, as exemplified by the cosmotarian belief that marijuana should be legalized and taxed, whereas pure libertarians want to eliminate taxes, not create new ones. Classical liberals are, in my opinion, the purest form of libertarianism. The reason why they are called classical liberals is because liberal was once defined the same way libertarians are today. Before the progressive era twisted its meaning into an almost socialist ideology, The most well-known classical liberals were President Thomas Jefferson and Grover Cleveland, but the philosophers of this ideology include Adam Smith, Frederick Bastiat, John Locke, and the Austrian economists Tom Woods and Peter Schiff. Their views are basically a much more radical version of cosmotarians, but their ideology comes from a philosophy of property rights and the non-aggression principle, and they apply that principle to their politics across the board. Classical liberals generally believe only in small, local governments, one that can be held accountable to the people and is served merely to administer a court system and defense. Lastly are the voluntarianists, or sometimes called anarchists. Unlike the perception that an anarchist would be like a Somalian pirate or that of the Unabomber, these individuals take the non-aggression principle and apply it so severely that they believe a government should not exist at all. Known voluntarianists include Stefan Molyneux, Adam Kokesh, and the hosts from Free Talk Live. They criticize all other branches of libertarians as belonging to a group that they like to dub minarchists, which is the belief that government is bad, except a little government must be necessary and tolerated. The voluntarianist believes that the government is not necessary and all actions can occur peacefully in a truly free, voluntary society that emphasizes the value of a free market. Many anarchists are still fond of the classical liberal philosophers, but believe that the smallest governments have always turned into the biggest governments, and thus a small government can never be maintained as such. Michael Badnarik, who is the former 2004 Libertarian presidential candidate, came to a Libertarian Party convention in 2010 to criticize them for agreeing on 95% of the issues, but argue 95% of the time on the 5% that they disagree on. This is why the Libertarian Party can never reach 1%, despite the fact that at least 10% of the American population call themselves libertarian. The reason Ron Paul is so important is because he seems to unite almost all members of the 6 groups I've just described. By reading much of his writing and listening to many of his speeches, it is easy to see how and why. Philosophically, he appears to be a classical liberal, with voluntarianist instincts. Sometimes he sounds like he would favor abolishing the state altogether, but cannot say so as long as he remains in Congress. Much like historian Tom Woods, Ron Paul often advocates removing government involvement altogether in almost any issue. Politically, he knows this won't sell to the Republican Party, of which he is a member of, so instead he favors federalist and constitutionalist positions of merely letting the states decide, which is a strong paleo-conservative view. Instead of tackling the issue of drugs or marriage, paleos simply want to pass the responsibility to the states, whereas a classical liberal would have individual rights trumping state rights and would look to have no government involvement at all in the issue. To them, the Constitution is not libertarian enough. So Ron Paul may very well believe that ending all government services is a good idea, but advocates a paleo-conservative position in Congress because it doesn't compromise the way he votes. He still votes no on all unconstitutional legislation. In addition, he isn't afraid to take controversial stands on issues such as marriage and drugs, to the dismay of most modern-day conservatives, and liberals praise him for his stand against popular conservative rhetoric. Ron Paul has mainstreamed libertarianism because he is the perfect conduit to bring together the various factions of libertarian Americans, because he applies his principles to his votes and to how he runs his congressional office, and how he seems to be willing to tell the truth no matter what the political price. He is the scourge of the status quo and the mainstream media, but to regular Americans, he speaks pure common sense and brings out the libertarian in all of us.